There's 10 plus messages you could look at throughout this whole passage, but that just caught my eye. He restoreth my soul. I got to thinking, looking back at the other verses before it, it's saying, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And I thought, if we are in his fold, we're sheep in the Lord's fold, right? Why is there a need for us to be restored? We're sitting here and we have everything we can need. The verse 1, it says, I shall not want. In that verse, we see the shepherd's ability to provide is never doubted. David wrote himself, I shall not want. He knows when the shepherd is there, we have no reason to ask for anything, really. We're not lacking anything. And so it caught my eye in verse 3. It says, he restoreth my soul. I was thinking, why does this soul need to be restored if we're already sheep? If we're already Christians, in this case, what needs restoring, right? So I just want to break down this phrase just a little bit here before we get into the meat of the message. First off, the word he. Who is he? Go back to verse 1. It says, the Lord is my shepherd. He's not just any shepherd. He's not someone else's shepherd. He's my shepherd. He's a personal shepherd, right? He knows each and every one of our needs for us, for our lives, and what we're lacking, okay? This image of Christ as a shepherd is an intimate and personal one. He's not set forth as the distant king or lord over us, nor as the impersonal rock or shield that he can be for us as well. But he's the shepherd who always takes care of all of the needs of his sheep. He knows us personally, and he knows our strengths and our weaknesses. Again, I want to point out again, but in verse 1 it says, we see the shepherd's ability to provide isn't ever doubted. It says, I shall not want, right? That's because he knows us. He knows what we need, and he's going to provide it. That's who, when it says he restoreth my soul, he is my shepherd, the one that cares for me and the one that knows what I need. The phrase restoreth my soul, again, I just see the word my, that refers back to that personal shepherd again. It's he restoreth my soul. He cares for me and what I need to be restored. But I looked into a little bit of what the Hebrew words mean in this passage. The word restore, it means to turn back, to cause to return, to refresh, or to recreate. So I thought that was interesting. I was like, to turn back, okay, to cause to return. He restoreth my soul. Okay, so the word soul here, look a little further, it says it literally means life or spirit. So you can literally translate that and you can say, he causes my life to return. And I just think that is so awesome, right? Him being our personal shepherd, he knows exactly what we need, and he can cause our life to return. He says he quickens me is another definition. He causes me to live is another way you could interpret it. The literal Hebrew translation, word for word, has two possible definitions. It says, my soul he bringeth, or my soul he will bring back. And I just thought that was awesome. Here, the word soul, again, we look back and it means life or spirit, so it means my life he brings back. That doesn't necessarily mean that we were somehow cast out of the fold, right? Once we're in the fold, once we're saved, we're sealed into the day of redemption. We can never be outside of that shepherd's fold, right? But we can see here that my soul or my life or my spirit within me can be restored back into him, okay? Let's go a little further here. So that's just that phrase, just kind of breaking it down simply. But I wanted to point out something. I don't know if you guys, anybody here ever been around a real shepherd in real life or gotten the chance to, I know there's a lot of farms in this area and stuff. I live out in Leicester, tons of farms out there. I know most of the people around here know more about cattle, chickens, pigs, stuff like that, but there's not a whole lot of real shepherds. And there's a reason for that, because being a shepherd is a full-time job. You know, there's a reason that David didn't come with all of his other brothers before the king. When Jesse called his sons, David was busy. That's a full-time job. Part of the reason for that, there's this phenomenon that happens to sheep sometimes. Like I mentioned, they're pretty helpless without the shepherd. And there's this thing that can happen when you get a cast sheep or a cast down sheep. Okay? A cast sheep is a sheep that is rolled over onto its back. This can cause the sheep to die in a short period of time if the shepherd does not intervene. They'll almost look like a type of a tortoise or something just on its back, like flowing its arms around. They just get stuck on their back and they can't do anything about it. And that sounds kind of crazy. You'd think they could just roll over, but they can't. What happens is, and I know I wrote this in here somewhere later, but we'll get to it. But that happens is they start getting rolled over and these gases accumulate kind of in a certain part of their stomach. And it starts to cut off the circulation to their legs, and they're just helpless. If the shepherd doesn't keep account of his sheep and make sure that he's keeping track of not just the 99, but all 100 of them, then one of them might fall over to the side and end up rolling on its back and just be helpless, and it's going to end up dying. It can die within about 3 or 4 hours, what I was researching said. So it's going to lay on its back, and it's going to flail its legs around frantically, struggling to stand up, but without success. It will occasionally bleed out for help, but generally it just sits there lashing about in a frightened, frustrated manner. It doesn't really even call it for help that much. That's kind of sad to me. I think about, man, this sheep, all it has to do is just call out for the shepherd to come and help. And again, I'm trying not to get ahead of myself, but how much is that like us today? When we find ourselves in a situation that we've gotten ourselves into, and we're stuck on our back, and really the only thing we can do is call out for the shepherd to help us, because there's nothing we can do to fully change that situation ourselves, right? So if the shepherd doesn't arrive on the scene within a reasonably short time, the sheep's going to die. This is why it's so important for the shepherd to constantly keep account on a sheep. When one sheep is missing, the shepherd's first thought immediately is that one of his sheep is cast somewhere, and that he must go and find it and set it on its feet again. Again, I already mentioned there's that story of the shepherd going to find that one sheep, leaving the 99 and going to find the one, because if he doesn't find that one, that sheep can die. It's going to die. For Christians, what we're talking about is kind of like a spiritual death. It doesn't mean, again, that you're out of the fold. It doesn't mean that you lose your salvation or something. But how many people have seen Christians, especially nowadays, right? We're kind of either fully in that church of Laodicea age, or we're kind of transitioning from that Philadelphia, that strong church with all the missionaries, transitioning into that Laodicean age here near the end of time. And we find so many times churches and Christians that are just stuck on their back, totally helpless, just without the shepherd. So I already explained how when they're on their back, their stomach gets filled with gases, cuts off the circulation. Just for a little bit of a visual, whenever the shepherd finds the sheep, and I'm going to get into some more details about why these sheep get cast here in a minute, and that's going to relate to us as Christians. But whenever the shepherd finds a sheep, he has to pick the sheep up, and he actually, I wish I had something to explain this with a little bit better. He picks a sheep up, sets it between his legs, and kind of holds it upright so he can get the blood flowing again, and he has to sit there and lovingly massage its legs and massage its body, kind of work those gases back into place and get the circulation going again. And it just, isn't that such a beautiful picture what God does to us, right? How whenever we're stuck on our back, whenever we're trying to do things on our own, he can just pick us up and say, listen, I'm going to take care of you. Even if you can't handle it yourself, right? It takes that shepherd's loving care to get that sheep back on its feet and go in the right direction again. And I'm not going to take long preaching this morning. It's kind of funny, whenever the Lord deals with you a certain way about a certain message, it can either be like really exciting or kind of intimidating. And I just could not get past that one phrase, he restoreth my soul. And that phrase here, that book I was talking about, how the shepherd was referring to this chapter itself, it was a shepherd's viewpoint of Psalm 23. He was talking about, he restoreth my soul, is most likely referring to this process of finding a cast sheep and restoring its life, because without the shepherd finding that sheep and actually doing the steps necessary, that sheep is going to lose its life, right? And so he's restoring its life to it. He's bringing its life back, giving it another chance at life. Now, this process of bringing back a cast sheep, it's not something you can't just come and just set it back right up on its feet and just walk away and leave it alone. Before you get that blood circulating back, those gases in the right spot, that sheep's just going to fall right back over again, right? Now, the shepherd really has to take his time, and it's a time-consuming process, but how awesome is it that God takes the time with each and every one of us, and he like, same thing, leaving the 99 and finding that one. He finds us being that one and takes the time to really make sure that we're taken care of fully, and it's a time-consuming process, but he loves each and every sheep, and he wants to cause the sheep's life to return and restore our souls. So, main 3 points I want to talk about today are 3 ways a sheep, or a Christian in this case, can become cast down. Okay? So number 1, if you take notes, you can write these down. Hopefully I'll make this clear enough to where you can actually take notes on it. Number 1 is the sheep has an idea of just looking for a soft spot, right? They're out here grazing in the field all day and stuff. Sheep like to lay down a lot too. They're not just always on their feet. Sometimes they just go and look for a soft spot. The sheep that chooses a comfortable spot, some kind of rounded bedding area, very often becomes cast. In such a situation, it's so easy just to roll over on their backs. In the Christian life, there's a great danger in always looking for the easy place, the cozy corner or the comfortable position where there's no hardship, no need for endurance, and no demand upon self-discipline. Many Christians in church today like to just take the easy way out. Isn't that true of today? I'm not saying it's you guys. That's the best thing about preaching at other churches. I don't really know you guys that well. But even outside of this church, think about other churches that we might know of. Think about how many people that like to just kind of take the easy way out, right? Things like, you always hear this example, people that just like to skip church and go to the lake, right? People would kind of get a boat and they'll just go and be like, I just want to spend some time out on the lake. Just look for the easy way out. They don't want to be held accountable to being in church and to having that self-discipline that it takes to continue to walk with the shepherd. Sometimes it's sometimes people can get so involved into sports or other activities that it takes away the feeling of how important and essential it is to be faithful to church. Without saying any names, because this happens all across the country, it's way more common nowadays to see sports take priority over church or God. I just know even when I was in high school, it was different than it is now, and I graduated in 2013, so it's not been that long. I know I'm getting a little old, right? 26 now. But no, but I just remember growing up and even through high school on Wednesdays, for example, we wouldn't have any practice or any games on Wednesdays. It was just something you didn't do because you knew people were in church, right? Especially this part of the country. That's something you didn't do. And now looking at it, and I mean, of course they'll have practice. They'll just have games on Wednesdays, but it's even more than that. They'll actually have practice and games just on Sundays. It's not even some special thing. It used to be a thing where, I don't know if you guys are into sports or anything. My sister used to play softball on a travel ball team. And she told the coaches, my dad was one of the coaches as well, but she told the other coaches, I'll play on this travel softball team. She was really good. They really wanted her to play. But her one condition was that she wasn't going to be there on Sundays. Because travel softball and travel other sports, you just go and you travel. And there's a lot of tournaments on Sundays, stuff over the weekend. But that was pretty much her one condition. And it used to be a thing that was just primarily those special groups like travel sports, right? But it's not even that anymore. Now it's just regular youth league. It's just regular high school type stuff where they're not afraid to practice on Sundays or play games on Sundays, right? They take for granted and they just kind of excuse that feeling of how important and essential it is to be faithful in church. This is one of the fastest ways to see someone sort of just die off, spiritually speaking, and to become cast and just stuck in a way of living that is so comfortable and fun and easy, right? Because they're not sitting there holding themselves accountable for the kind of life that we should be expected to live as a Christian, right? To be faithful to church. So, point number one, like I just mentioned, is the idea of looking for a soft spot, something comfortable. Number two is a sheep having too much wool. Now, often when a sheep's fleece becomes very long and heavily matted with mud, manure, burrs, and other debris, it's much easier for a sheep to become cast, literally weighed down with its own wool. Okay? In the scriptures, wool depicts the old self-life in the Christian, right? It is the outward expression of the inward attitude. Okay, so this example of what the sheep's wool is, it's not strictly just things that people can, you can see it on the outside of the sheep, but it is an outward demonstration of what's really going on the inside. Sometimes as sheep's wool, as it's grown over time, it doesn't get that nasty, it doesn't get that matted down, but the longer we let it grow out, the longer we let it go without taking care of it, the nastier it gets, the heavier it gets, the more matted down it gets. And that's so true with our own lives too. We sit here and we take part in little things here and there that we don't think other people notice, and stuff that we think is just on the inside, but over time it's going to accumulate, right? And you're going to start to actually see the results of that on the outside. That's what wool is representing for us as Christians. So just as the wool gets all sorts of debris and junk all in it, this is where we find the clinging accumulation of things, of possessions, of things that we're thinking that no one can even notice, really, but it does. It does show. I found this interesting. It's also significant that no high priest was ever allowed to wear wool when he entered into the Holy of Holies to make a sacrifice for the people's sins. He was never allowed to wear wool. And I thought that was really interesting. I was thinking, why is that? And so, because this wool spoke of self. It spoke of pride and of the priest having personal preference of what he wanted to wear. It was personal preference outside of what God had asked him to wear and what God wanted, and God couldn't tolerate that. And I thought that was just really interesting. Whenever the priest actually went into the Holy of Holies, he was required just to wear all white, right? There was no chance for that wool to be colorful, right? A lot of times back then they would take wool and they would make it different colors, stuff like purple to signify royalty, just all sorts of different things like that. But there was nothing like that that was allowed inside of the Holy of Holies, the place where God's presence was. It had to be pure and clean and white. Okay? So if we wish to continue walking with God and not be forever cast down, this is an aspect of our lives that God must deal with drastically. God has to shear this wool coat and eliminate the danger of us being cast down. Now, sheep do not enjoy being sheared. I don't know if you guys have ever watched a sheep being sheared. I've seen some videos. First off, the shears are intimidating. These things are like that wide, and they really go to town on these things. That's an interesting video to look up. If you've never seen a sheep being sheared, you ought to look that up. But they don't enjoy it, and it's very hard work for the shepherd, but it must be done. I had a friend of mine who was a patient. Well, not a friend. He was a patient. I guess he's a friend too. But I work in physical therapy. He's one of my patients, and he has his own sheep. And I was asking questions about how often the sheep had to be sheared and stuff like that. And it wasn't that often, but whenever it did happen, it was a lengthy process. If you don't have a system set up, ready to go with the right tools and the right things you need for that sheep, it's a lengthy process. I mean, you really have to take the time to work it down. You don't want to cut the sheep up too much and stuff like that, because whenever you get heavy wool pulling on the sheep's skin, it causes these wrinkles to form. And so you have to be careful and really take the time to do it right, to get all that wool off. But after being sheared, both the shepherd and the sheep feel a sense of relief. The shepherd no longer is constantly in fear of the sheep being cast, and the sheep can find peace and a sense of pleasure in being set free from the heavy, hot coat that it had on it, right? Think of us as Christians. We get all this stuff weighing us down. We get the weight of possessions, of things that we're being a part of, even if it's just sin in our lives weighing us down that we think we're trying to hide. We're trying to act like it's not a big deal. We're carrying on with the other sheep like, I got this coat on me. It's really not a big deal and stuff. And other sheep look at you and they think, well, he's doing just fine with that coat that he's got on. It's probably nothing. But that coat's going to hold you down. It's going to cause you to be way more likely to roll over onto your back, to get stuck in a situation where you feel like you can't get out of without God's help, and to be just cast down. So, just one last point on that one. What a pleasure it is when we are made free from our old selves, right? The wool is a representation of our old selves and what we've been a part of, and how freeing is that, knowing that we don't have to be weighed down by that for the rest of our lives. I mentioned earlier, whenever the heavy wool weighs down on the sheep, you get these, I'm folding right here because I got a little fat roll right here, right? You get these little wrinkles on the sheep. We can have fun in the house of God. It's okay if you want to smile and laugh. I know I'm a little chunky. We can laugh at it. It's fine. But the sheep get those wrinkles and stuff, and sometimes the sheep do get cut, right? It's never enough to really cause damage, but you might see some scars on a sheep. If you shear it all the way down, you might see some scars where it's been sheared before. And that's the same thing when God is taking care of us and our heavy burdens and our wool and stuff that we've accumulated upon ourselves. It can lead to scars, and it can. And I can say that from experience. I know I was joking around about my age earlier, but even at 26 years old, I can look back at things in my life that I'm not proud of, and I can know God really had to take his time. I had a really heavy coat of wool on me at one point, and it's something that we constantly have to keep down. We just constantly have to work on it, keep it down, and ask for God to help us with that kind of stuff, because it's not something we can do on our own. Okay, so that's number 2, is that when a sheep having too much wool. Okay, so what's the third way that it is more likely for a sheep to become cast? And this is kind of going back to what I was saying a second ago. A sheep that's too fat, right? And that's not talking about like us as Christians physically speaking, right? But sheep that are too fat are neither the most healthy nor the most productive. And very often the fattest of the sheep are the ones that are going to become cast. That's almost the most likely ones to become cast. And I touched on some of this earlier. I tried not to get ahead of myself, but if a sheep becomes too fat, it will not be agile or nimble enough to stay on its feet and to be able to recover if it starts to lean one way or the other. A lot of times when these sheep, I mentioned like finding a soft spot, or that sometimes the sheep just end up in a certain position that they end up kind of finishing rolling over. And I was researching that a little bit. Like, do they just, you guys ever seen fainting goats? You know what fainting goats are? You can scare them. They lock up and they're just like on their back and they get stuck. It's not like that with a sheep. The sheep lay down, they get comfortable, things like that, or they're fat or they have too much wool. And over time, they start to get on their side and get a little bit more comfortable. And then eventually it gets to where their feet aren't touching the ground anymore. And at that point, that's when it's dangerous. That's when you start to actually roll fully onto their back and they lose control, right? And it's so easy for us, this is a little side topic sort of, but it's so easy for us as Christians to feel like we're in control and to feel like our feet are still touching the ground, so we're safe, right? Spiritually speaking, our feet are still on the ground. We still have control of what we're doing. But then as soon as we lose that contact with the ground, that's when we find ourselves in trouble. So if a sheep becomes too fat, it will not be agile or nimble enough, like I said, to stay on its feet. It won't be able to correct itself or make adjustments it needs to stay upright. But if the shepherd even suspects his sheep, or the whole sheep, all of the flock, are becoming cast for this reason, he will take long-range steps to correcting this problem. It's not something that you can just address in one quick action, just like the other ones, right? None of this stuff with restoring our soul, with restoring a cast sheep, none of it's quick. None of it can just happen at the snap of the shepherd's fingers, right? It's a process, because ultimately the shepherd wants the sheep to be healthy and strong and sturdy and wants him to be able to continue walking on his own feet with the shepherd. It's not something where the shepherd just wants to carry the sheep all the time. That's not what this relationship between the sheep and the shepherd's about. The relationship is about, as a sheep, as a Christian, being able to be with the shepherd and walking with the shepherd and trusting that the shepherd knows where to take us, knows where to go, and knows what we need, just like the rest of this Psalm 23 talks about. But in doing so, we can't just expect the shepherd to be able to carry all of us all the time, right? We have to be able to trust him that he's going to do it the right way and that we can walk alongside with him. But sometimes us as Christians, we can face the same issue of becoming almost like the sense of being fat spiritually. Christians can sometimes find success in their careers, things like their homes or financially or socially. You can feel like this sense of success and almost a feeling of I've made it or I've arrived, right? I see this a lot of times with younger people, right? Whenever you first start finding success in life, you start a career, people buy their first house, and you notice the majority of people here today aren't youth, right? And there's a reason for that, right? There's not as much of a desire or a need. They don't feel like they need to be here. Why would they need to be here? They've got it made. They've got everything they're trying to do in life. They feel like they're being successful. They went to school and did all this stuff that the world told them to do, that the world says you have to do to be successful and to become fat and stuff, right? America itself is like the fattest nation in the whole world, right? But at the same time, we're like the richest nation in the whole world, and there's a correlation between those two. Now, in old times, probably even around the same time this Bible was written, 1611, around those times, if you saw someone that was fat, if you see these old artists like Leonardo da Vinci and all these famous artists, if they depicted someone as having a round belly, that means that they were very wealthy. They were very, very well off. They were very self-reliant. They didn't have to rely on other people's help for their own health and their own sustenance and things like that. And sometimes Christians can find that same sense of feeling like I've made it or I've arrived, or it can lead to a sense of well-being or self-assurance, and that feeling can be very dangerous, right? Whenever you think you can just handle it on your own, that feeling of I've made it or I don't really need God anymore, right? And how many times does that happen in today's churches too? Really, all three of these main points we can apply to the church nowadays. But what's sad is this even happens in churches after seeing numbers grow, after seeing souls saved or other things prosper. I think it was last time I was here, you guys were having a vacation Bible school. Now, like I already mentioned, there's some faces here today that I don't remember seeing before, and maybe I just don't remember because it's been a little bit, right? But either way, the numbers aren't down, stuff like that. But how easy is it to get all this effort, to put forth all this effort, and you feel like you are working so hard to achieve something in a church or yourself, And once you achieve that, you kind of want to sit back and relax, and you want to say, look at that. We did really good, didn't we? There were souls, sorry, I keep popping my knuckles right at the mic, right? There were souls saved. There were things that happened. There's more people here, something like that. And it's easy just to sit back and to think, well, we did it. We don't have to, we can just kind of relax now. But we can begin to feel like we've done so well and that things are looking so positive that we lose our sense of reliance on the shepherd. Just as the sheep gets fat and it's been eating all this food, it doesn't have that much of a reliance on feeling like the shepherd has to guide them to where the good grass is, where the healthy stuff is. They're just kind of fat. They just want to lay down. They think, you know what, I'm fine. I don't need the shepherd anymore. But when things begin to lead down that road, we may just find ourselves being placed in a sort of diet from God. When giving a warning to the church of Laodicea in Revelation chapter 3, God points out how the church feels that they are rich and in need of nothing, but they were actually in great, desperate danger. God may take away things in our life, send us through valleys, or challenge us in ways that we least expect it in order to remind us of how we are able to become so blessed and fat to begin with. So I think I skipped it in here in my notes somewhere, but what happens with the sheep whenever it gets in this situation, I already mentioned it a little bit, but the shepherd places almost like a diet on the sheep over his whole flock, and he really watches carefully each and every one of them to make sure that they're staying healthy. He'll put them on a more rigorous routine because they don't just stay in one spot, right? He keeps them moving a little bit more often from place to place. He doesn't just let them sit in the same spot and just continue to eat. Sometimes he'll have to take away some of the grain that they're giving them because grain is really what kind of helps animals get some of that girth and fat about them. And he'll take some of that away from them. And that can happen in our own lives sometimes. It doesn't have to be necessarily that we find ourselves in a situation where we feel like that fat feeling spiritually where we just don't think we need God. But sometimes when God takes those things away in our life, things that we feel like we didn't deserve to be taken away from us or be placed in situations that we think are challenging or rough, anything that he places in front of us or that he leads us into ultimately is to strengthen us and to fortify our faith and confidence in his control in our life, right? It's just another step that he takes so that he can teach us to realize it's not ourselves that are going to lead us to becoming healthy, strong, sturdy sheep, that we have to rely on his control in our lives because he knows what's best for us, and ultimately we don't. The shepherd knows what we need when we need it, and he will go to extreme measures to make sure that we do not stay cast down. And so, like I said, I knew I wouldn't be too long, but just I wanted to touch on those main 3 points of how us as Christians can become cast down and just stuck on our backs and pretty much dying, spiritually speaking, right? The Bible, all throughout the Bible, it talks about the principle of if you're not going forward with something, then that means that you're going backwards the other direction. There's no such thing as just staying still in the same spot, right? He says, if you're lukewarm, I'm going to spew you out of my mouth, right? You're either making progress toward God or you're going the other direction, right? And so if we are not being mindful of these things that can keep us cast down, we're going to be going the other direction, right? We're going to end up cast down on our backs, not being able to make any kind of progress towards God. And so I just wanted to challenge you guys today with some of those thoughts. If you guys would go ahead and stand for me, please, if you don't mind. If everyone would just bow their head and close their eyes. Now, I know this is a smaller church, and all of you guys know each other pretty well, I'm sure. And even some of your personal lives, you guys know each other very well. But this is between you and God right now. This isn't between you and the person beside you. It's not between you and even your wife or husband. This is something between you and God right now. What is it in your life that is leading you to be cast down more often than not? What is it that is either weighing you down? Do you have a thick wool coat, right? That outward reflection of the inner attitude of what's inside of you. Do you have things that are weighing you down in that way? Are you just so comfortable in where you're at and kind of maybe just sitting there in the pews and not being used, not volunteering to do stuff, not taking the action to do things for God and to make a difference for God in today's time? It's so important that we actually make the effort to do what it is that God has allowed us to do, to win souls and to make progress for Him, because time's running out, people. right? Maybe you've just kind of become complacent. Maybe you've been so blessed that you find yourself in that feeling of being just kind of fat, spiritually speaking, where you don't feel like you have to rely on God anymore. Just think about it within yourselves here. If someone wants to come down to the altar and pray, and just let yourself call out to the shepherd, right? You're out there in the field, you're stuck on your back, or you're close to it at least, and you need help. You can't get rid of it yourself. Right now you're cast down, you're on your back, and you're stuck, the blood circulation's out of your legs. You can't progress forward toward God right now because you're stuck in whatever it is. Just call out to him. Just call out to him to come and find you and to come and set you back on your feet and to restore your soul, right? He wants to bring that life back into you. He wants to bring that good, excited, energetic spirit back inside of you. Okay, let's pray. Lord, I just thank you so much for this day. Thank you so much for giving us this beautiful psalm, this beautiful chapter.